Hello and welcome to Hearts Standard. I am Craig Cairns, and with Joel off this week, he will be gutted to not be here to talking about his favourite topic, Vladimir Romanov. But instead, we have brought in the man behind Amoruso Let's It Run. He's also part of Scarves Around the Funnel. It's Scott McIntosh. How are you doing, Scott?
Yeah, very well, Craig. Thanks very much for having me on, mate. How are you?
Yeah, good. You, how was your weekend? You said that you were telling me that you're not the biggest fan of the international breaks.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I've really got much skin in the game when it comes to international football. Although I did watch both the Scotland matches. My son's now 7, and he's shown a real interest in everything football wise. So I kind of can't avoid it now. And obviously, with James Wilson's possible involvement, there was an added factor there from a selfish Hearts point of view. But yeah, apart from that, I was really just catching up on some films I've been meaning to watch for a while. Although the tone was no less depressing than watching Scotland. It was actually an Auschwitz movie called Zone of Interest. So yeah,
Oh yeah, I don't know what you mean.
I really should have avoided that and maybe just watched reruns of The Predator or Die Hard or something like that. But yeah, I try to go for something a bit highbrow, but yeah, it didn't leave me in a great mood by the end of it.
Yeah, I was going to say, if there's a Scotland game on, then you need something to potentially counterbalance being depressed by
I didn't
Scotland.
schedule that well. Obviously, I had too much faith in Scotland getting a result.
Of course, last night, James Wilson did make history by becoming the youngest Scottish international ever. We'll speak about him a wee bit at the end. Should mention as well, the last time we did a video, it didn't see the light of day. We pre-recorded it, so we've gone live this time in case Vladimir Romanov comes out with a statement while we are recording, and we have to can it like we did last time. But just before we get to all of that, just we mention about the sponsors. Hearts Standard is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Edinburgh and the surrounding area, you'll find the one S1 Jobs. Start your search today at s1jobs.com. Now, with that out of the way, should start, Scott, I guess, with what was your kind of main takeaway from that let's say explosive interview from Vladimir Romanov at the weekend?
Yeah, I think look, the content obviously takes you by surprise because we weren't quite sure what he was going to come up with. But really, in terms of the tone and his intent from what he wanted to get out of it, it was very clear that he was obviously aware that the podcast had been running. He's clearly been aware that certain things have been said by certain ex-colleagues of his and former and sort of employees at the club as well. And I think he just viewed it as an opportunity to get his side across. I don't think he was really interested on trying to assist Martin navigate it through a normal structure of an episode. It was, yeah, I think by the second or third question that Martin asked him, I think he realised himself that he wasn't really going to get a direct answer. There was going to be a lot of deflection and a lot of bringing it back to his topics and his need to get his side of the story across. But look, as a listener, it was captivating, wasn't it? You know, there was a lot in there that we've heard a lot either through the sort of jungle drums from fans over the last few years, or even through other journalists or, you know, people that have been closely associated with him. But now we got to hear his side of the story. So it was a great episode, and I think it capped off the show really well.
I should mention, we have promoted it enough, but I didn't actually mention that is the BBC Star of Hearts documentary that we're talking about that's available on BBC Sounds. And yes, I said at the end of last week that it was just it was a genius way of rounding up how they made it a bonus episode, and didn't really kind of hint or give away at all that they were going to be speaking to him. But yeah, just to pick on one of the things you said there, I think the best example of Romanov trying to get his narrative across was it was about the second or the third question or something like that, and he was asked about he had mentioned unprompted about being offered to buy Liverpool, and then Martin Geisler followed that up with, "Why didn't you?" And he answers it, and then who knows about the validity of it, but he answers it. But then he goes from there and like just takes like a verbal machine gun through like lots of different people, accusing like Craig Gordon and several other Hearts players of engineering moves to Celtic and all that kind of stuff. It was really, that was kind of like the biggest example of him trying to take the narrative, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And like I say, I think it was, he knew this was his one shot to get across what he felt or what he thought about certain people. I think the George Folk stuff, I mean, I'm not saying there's any particular sort of substance to what he said, but it was funny. The way he just kept on referring to him as the Lord, I just found really hilarious. So look, he's value for money. I think everyone knows that, even from out with the Hearts circle, the inner circle at Hearts and the fans. Everyone's known that for 20 years about Vladimir Romanov. So you weren't surprised that, there was plenty of entertainment in it. As long as you don't take anything at face value, I think you can just enjoy it as a piece of sort of jackanory or entertainment and then move on the next day.
Did you share his views on referees, Scott? I've heard you speak out about them recently.
Yeah, I mean, this is...
I'm saying this a wee bit in jest. I mean, you're not quite as crazy when it comes to Vlad, when it comes to views on referees, but I heard you say something recently.
This is one of the things I've maybe got a little bit of sort of kind of empathy or sort of sympathy for him here, because it's something I might bring up with James and Martin. We've actually got them on Scarves Around the Funnel later on today. I found the episode around the Andy Davis situation, I thought it was too easy to just dismiss Romanov off as an unhinged individual during that episode. I do think whether he was doing it for Hearts fans or not, I would always dismiss that. But let's say he was. There is a section of Hearts fans who do echo his sentiments towards the establishment in Scotland. And I think, look, rightly or wrongly, that's something that no other stewardship of the club have ever really taken on board. And it's probably something that, for all their faults, Celtic and Rangers do well. They will speak for the fans. And again, a lot of it could be tinfoil hat conspiracy theories, but ultimately they're looking after their customers and they're following on for their customers' feedback or their concerns. That's one of the few things I do have a bit of sympathy for Romanov on. Now, again, I think a lot of it's ego. I think a lot of it's probably driven by the life that he'd lived up until that point. I think if you're trying to make your way as a sort of capitalist figure in sort of communist, sort of Soviet Union, I think you're probably going to have to live with a daily dose of paranoia. So I think that stuck with him throughout his time, sort of throughout Hearts as well. And I think Rangers and Celtic were kind of just the stick in which you wanted to sort of beat them with. But yeah, I'm fine with that sort of stuff. I don't think it really matters. We're quite far removed from it now in terms of the comments that were made for the time. But I think the Andy Davis thing, that incident, nobody can tell me he wasn't thinking about what Rangers needed that night and not about Hearts. Craig Levine's even came out with an interview after a Rangers Dundee United game once where he said pretty much the same thing about...
Yes,
I can't remember. I think it maybe Mike McCurry.
Was it McCurry? It was Mike McCurry. Yeah, it
was
semi-final.
McCurry.
There was an offside that was given for a player that had obscured the player's... the goalkeeper's line of sight from like 20 yards away or something like that.
Yeah. And look, Craig Levine's been involved in football for the best part of 40 years now. And even he said that was a day where the referee, it didn't matter about what Dundee United needed. Rangers needed to win that game for the league. And I do think games can be refereed from even a subconscious level on that basis. No matter whether you think it's cheating or subconscious bias, it's still in favour of two particular teams. So I do think he was in his right to come out with that sort of stuff. But again, the presentation was always quite unhinged, and I think that's always what went against him. It's a conversation you probably should have, firstly with your board, then in private, but he wanted to always do everything in front of the media, and that never helped, I don't think.
You kind of summed up what I was going to say. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Craig Levine, because I was going to mention, but slightly different, that it was just like it came a couple of years after Craig Levine had taken on, and Craig Levine didn't quite get the same stick as Romanov did, but at the same time, the language, you mentioned it in your previous answer, like calling George Fawkes the Lord over and over again. It's funny, but it loses your credibility. The same way as he like calls people thieves. It's just such a sort of Soviet era insult, isn't it? It's just kind of like, nobody here calls each other thieves. It's like it just seems like such a sort of dated, like I say,
I think it's quite a quick way to try and win the moral high ground, isn't it? It's
like discrediting the opponent,
to try and belittle them and sort of strengthen your case. So I understand the reasoning behind it, but again, no real substance behind it, no real evidence. I think a lot of the issues that come from the refereeing in Scotland is a lot of it is subconscious bias. But I think the Andy Davis one was one of those incidents, and his lack of time in Scottish football after that would probably point to it. I think people knew that night that was a real iffy one, and that's probably the one part of the series where I thought we could have possibly backed him a little bit there when discussing that one. That's one where I think he probably had a bit of a case.
I suppose there was enough sort of distraction going on with the Mika Lunas stuff and all that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was. Yeah, you don't want to stand and say that like a referee's this or bias or whatever, but if there's not something like that involved, it's the worst decision I've ever seen in the flesh. It was absolutely horrendous. Even like watching it back now, there's daylight between the players. It's absolutely absurd. Another thing that was addressed in it was George Burley's drinking, I should say, in quotation marks. As Martin Geisler says in the documentary, George Burley didn't really give a right of reply because of his well-documented health issues that he's went public with recently. So Simon Hunt kind of had a right of reply for him, his assistant at the time. But to me, I don't know if you feel the same about me, but I just wonder whether this is just like it screams to me like Romanov exaggerating something and looking for something, an excuse. I think that's clear to see. I wonder whether the drinking thing specifically is just kind of like a cultural thing, and he's misconstrued a couple of drinks after a game, which Burley comes from an era of playing where that was just the done thing, and misconstrued that as him being an alcoholic. Now, I'm pretty sure there's lots of people from lots of different countries. I don't know if Lithuania is one of them, right enough, or Russia, but lots of different countries could look at Scotland and rightfully point at us and mock our drinking culture or say that there's a problem or say alcoholism and things like that. But I'm not sure in this context whether, it seems to me like it was maybe something like that, like a manager sharing a glass of wine with the other manager after the game, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, look, there were some alleged rumours even around the time and shortly after Burley's departure that Derby had one or two concerns around his sort of drink consumption. There was one or two rumours about him being pulled over in that when he was in Edinburgh. I think for me, the biggest problem I've got with Vladimir Romanov bringing it up is that it seems hard for him to separate the art from the artist when discussing Burley, but then you go on to discuss his replacement, and he was quite happy to take him on walks and all. Like, yeah. I think if you compare the alleged misdemeanours of George Burley against the well-known factual misdemeanours of Graham Rix,
which he didn't even present as facts. Romanov in his answer didn't present the things that Rix has admitted himself.
Although it was a police cover-up, wasn't it? I mean, look, that's where you just lose all credibility again. You know, you're willing to separate the art from the artist with Graham Rix, but not with George Burley. And this is where, again, it just points towards the fact it was all about ego. My issue, my biggest issue with Graham Rix was the fact that he was hired because of his history, not in spite of it. He was hired because they saw that as leverage to manipulate him into doing what they say. And this is where the legacy issue around Romanov starts to falter as well, because he clearly had no divine intention to do well for Hearts. It was all about doing well for himself. And he would rather have Hearts mid-table being in full control of everything going on and having full autonomy of team selection than having George Burley selecting the team and being top of the league and having George Burley's name being sung. And unfortunately, when you have to look at it through those lenses, it's very difficult to look back on that spell and not have real sort of contempt for his behaviour during that time.
Yeah, I know. It's mad. Just like, I know, if you're just taking a back seat that season, even if Hearts don't go on to win the league, you'd think it'd be a relatively strong season. The fans are still going to sing his name. You know what I mean? They're like, just chill, mate. Just chill. People are still going to like you. But yes, he ruined it all because of, as you say, ego mainly. Just before we kind of wrap up from this and move on, the Bednar boxing. This I found quite bizarre. Well, first, I don't know. Do you think he was aware that this video footage exists? I mean, I would have assumed going into this.
I think so, because I think
he would have known.
Mark Geisler mentioned there was a request made for the video to be sent over to him. So
that, but when they were talking, were they not talking about like post them talking to him though? That he had asked for the footage,
possibly.
Right, I'd need to maybe listen to it again.
To be fair, the video footage only shows the confrontation. It doesn't actually show.
Yes, but even still, he lies about the confrontation.
Yeah, exactly. So it just really shows them having the sort of sparring match, eh? But you can see even from that clip, the Roman Bednar that he describes in his interview vastly differs from Roman Bednar you see in that video. That is a guy who you know is shit scared about hitting his employer. So
and he could end his life if he wants. He could end Romanov's life if he wants. The size difference is unbelievable.
Yeah, but I mean, in amongst all the more serious stuff, that was one of the more innocuous stuff. Like, it doesn't bother me if he's going to go all Walter Mitty with that sort of story, because it doesn't really have any great ramifications on anyone personally or otherwise. It's the other stuff. It's when he starts to talk about Craig Gordon's character or George Burley's character or other people. That's when it starts to come across a more malicious and more sort of evil.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It was that was all just a laugh in the end. It was just, to me, it just spoke to his mentality of still willing to give his version of events, which contradicts a video which most Hearts fans have seen. I don't know. This issue was kind of addressed by Martin Geisler, I think, in the final episode before the bonus episode. It's a bit simplistic, but it jostles with the idea of whether Romanov overall was a good or a bad thing for Hearts. It is a difficult one. It's not easy to just say good or bad, I don't think. But for me, I lean more, I don't know if you share this view, but I lean more towards a good thing, because for all the rubbish and the administration and all that kind of stuff, it meant that Hearts are still at Tynecastle now. Hearts are thriving and in a better place now than they would have been if Romanov hadn't have come in. And ultimately, that kind of tips the scales for me.
Well, look, I think one of the things is it depends on when you're being asked the question. I think because there's been so much of a review of his whole tenure, there's been the stories again, there's been regurgitation of things that may have stopped bothering you for years because you hadn't heard about it. I think if you were to just go up to a Hearts fan every 5 years or so and go, Vladimir Romanov, good or bad, and you would probably focus on the good first and foremost. You would concentrate on the fact that even if it was just a stay of execution, he kept us at Tynecastle. He bought us that breathing space. Let's face it, there wasn't a foundation of Hearts. There wasn't an Ann Budge. There was no White Knights in 2004. He was a necessary evil. That year. We just had to go with him. We had no other options. So for that, he'll always get his thanks. But for me, he got the adulation after that. The fans were on side with him for a considerable time after that anyway. So he got his thanks for that. I think the problem just now is we're all being asked this question at a time in which we're being reminded why he hired Graham Ricks. We're being reminded why he kept on sacking managers. We're being reminded just how ruthless he was in terms of even just looking after his own staff and paying them on time and just willfully just playing with their livelihoods. I think when you're being asked in amongst all these stories coming to light, it's very difficult to just try and concentrate on that one real positive. I think for me, what the podcast probably reinforced for me was the actual just thanks I've got for the players who played during that time, because that couldn't have been easy. And not just the teams that won the cups in 2006 and 2012, but anyone who came through the club doors during that spell, that wouldn't have been an environment that would have been easy to have thrived in, especially for younger players. And I think it probably just made me understand their circumstances more. I think if you think back to 2011 to 2012, the way that the PR was spun at the time at the club, many fans turned on Ryan Stevenson and David Templeton when they left the club, when in fact the true stories are that neither wanted to leave, but they both had to for their own reasons. So yeah, I think, you know, in a year's time, if you don't go thinking about this and somebody asks you the question, it's quite easy to probably say in balance it was better than it was bad. But for me just now, it's a roller coaster that I'm quite glad we're off. I understand.
Amen.
Yeah, I also understand as well. I think there's a little bit of trolling and black humour when people stick up for Romanov. I think they're actually just
Yes.
trying to wind up other people.
Leaning into it, yes. And I think there was a bit
Yeah.
of that at the time as well.
Yeah, of course there was. I think we didn't have an option to exit from that relationship.
Mhm.
We had to wait until he wanted to exit. So for us, it was kind of a case of, I mean, folk are asking us why we're hiring people that are on the sex offenders register. People are asking us why we're doing small businesses out of money. You had no way of defending it. So you kind of just leaned into the absurdity of it all and just defended them throughout it all. I think now that we can look back at it, I think we can all agree that anything he did do good for the club was by accident, really. He wasn't doing it for the betterment of the club. He was only in it for himself. But thankfully, he came along, and without him, we wouldn't have survived because, you know, we would never have survived going to midweek games, playing at
Yeah.
Murrayfield. The whole sort of historical heritage of the club would have died along with that decision to move away from Tynecastle. And I'm thankful that he came in when he did. But yeah, everything he'd done after that fact was pretty contemptible in my eyes, and I'm just glad he's no longer here, you know.
Yeah. I think that one of the worst examples of what you were talking about there, you kind of alluded to it, was him deliberately waiting until just before the deadline to pay people and things like that, even if he had the money
Yeah.
before. He was purposefully waiting until the end and things like that. And then through that as well, you're reminding me of Craig Thompson and how he dealt with that, and that wasn't even dealt with in the whole thing as well.
I know. That's the thing. That's just another story. But didn't they have
that
time
wasn't
to
brought.
that one, you know, 10
Not to have a
episodes,
go at,
you couldn't even
not
get
having
to
a go at
that
the podcast or anything, but yeah, that's just something. There was like stuff like that hasn't even made it. Yeah. Anyway, let's move on quickly from that and talk about something fairly positive, if not the result for Scotland last night. James Wilson made his debut. He became the youngest Scotland international ever. There's a wee bit of kind of misinformation out there about it, but he has taken John Lambie's record. Not that John Lambie, a much earlier John Lambie, an almost like more than 100-year record, I think it is. He's taken by becoming the youngest ever Scotland international. Before we kind of talk about how he was used and things like that, Scott, a great achievement, just another box ticked and an absolutely like incredible rise for James Wilson this season.
Yeah, and again, further validation towards him and his family, because let's face it, I think the decision to remain at the club when there was so much interest from down south, it would have been a lot of that would have been influenced by family trying to guide him down the right pathway. So I think a lot of kudos goes to him and them, because really he's done so well to not only, you know, force his way into the fringes of the first team last season, but then come into the team at a time when the team was really struggling for a spark, and coming in and making that impression. And not only that, but, you know, ensuring that we've now actually changed the shape of the team to try and force him into the side, you know. So I think he's done really well. I think there'll be constant discussions and arguments between fans over the next few weeks and months with regards to how much longer we'll have him and see him. But yeah, it was a real sort of credit to him and a real reward for everything that he's done, not just in the last 12 months, but obviously in terms of, you know, getting to this stage as a professional footballer over the last few years. So I hope he and his family are enjoying the moment. Hey, you're on mute, buddy.
Sorry, thank you. God, hope Joel's back soon. For me, the kind of thing this can do for an academy and stuff, not only does it show that it's producing results, but this can have a great influence in motivating those that are already in that academy, give them some sort of role model. It can attract younger players to make Hearts their destination rather than somewhere higher up the food chain than us, and things like that. So I hope that, I mean, and it could as well beyond just across Scotland and the performance schools in general, but I do hope that this does have those impacts on the Hearts Academy, that it can attract more players and, like I say, motivate others to make the similar kind of breakthrough that Wilson has.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is the last 2 or 3 years is probably the best position the academy's been in now for maybe 10 or 15 years. You know, it really was run into the ground by the previous administration. It took Craig Levein a number of years to even get back to any sort of workable level. And then Joe Savage has came in and obviously done his work on top of that as well. So we're only just starting to see the fruits of it with James Wilson coming through. To a lesser extent, the likes of Adam Forrester, Macaulay Tate and Finlay Pollock as well. And who knows, maybe even a couple of years down the line, maybe James Wilson's brothers as well might come in and make it a bit of a trio. So I think when you consider there's been talk about Alfie Osborne and Brighton maybe monitoring him, I think having this example now, it's so much easier for Neil Critchley to sit down with 16-year-olds and say, we're going to offer you a 2-year deal, and here's an actual black and white example as to where you could be if you apply yourself correctly. We'll give you the chance as long as you show the commitment and the quality that's needed.
Yeah, Alfie Osborne's a great example. That said, though, James Wilson's performance wasn't the best, but I would cut him some slack. Not just the fact that he was thrown in 3-0 down with Scotland, absolutely toiling in that match. Absolutely toiling. He was put on the right wing. I only really remember him playing there once this season at Easter Road. I don't think he started there, but he certainly went there at one point. Maybe it was the second half. Maybe it was a change of formation in half time of the second half or something like that. And he didn't perform well. He was a wee bit of a fish out of water. And I think the same kind of thing happened again. And similarly, I don't think Tommy Conway's a left winger either.
No. Or Kieran Tierney for that matter.
Yeah.
I think, look, unfortunately, it was a great moment for him to go on and earn that recognition, but he went on to what you probably saw was one of the most disjointed Scotland performances that I think we've ever seen under Steve Clarke. And even that moment where he loses possession, he's in central midfield. Nobody seemed to know the role by the end of that match. So I'm just glad that didn't lead to a goal. I was kind of just willing for the ball not to go to him. I know that sounds weird, but I was actually just wanting him to just come out of the game quite unscathed, considering the criticism that everyone else was walking away with. So, yeah, I think he'll hopefully just come away from that having, loved the experience of training with, guys who are currently playing a trade in Serie A and the English Premiership, and just taking that on board now to what he's already doing for the club.
Perfect. We will leave it there, Scott. Thanks very much for joining us. Thanks to everybody else for listening in. Please check everything else out at heartstandard.co.uk. You can subscribe to this channel for free. It allows you to comment on our videos. Thanks to everybody who did comment and didn't get the chance to read any out. And we will see you all soon.